If this is the first time you write tests for web applications, then this video is for you, because today we are going to test React components, props, input fields, form submission, all in one video. It's easier and more fun than you think, so let's get started. First of all, I'd like to say thank you very much for voting on the poll to decide on what content I create on my channel, because I want my channel to be community-based. And since you voted for Next.js and Jest, I decided to create a combo of videos between the two, how to test Next.js application with Jest and of course React testing library. So enough talking and let's start coding and testing. Before we get started, I want to say that everything you see me writing on the screen is available on my GitHub repository, so make sure to check out the description box in order to see the link to my GitHub repository to fork this repo to your account and clone it to your system and start coding along with me. So in order to start testing a Next.js application, I go to the Next.js documentations and installation. I install a Next.js application with create next app. After that, I go to the testing section with Jest and follow all the steps in order to configure Jest to work with Next. I follow all the steps until this, add test script to package.json. So after you add these two scripts to your package.json, you can start following along with me. That's all I have done here, and also I created some components. So if I run npm run dev to start a development server, you can see that I have a very simple application of a form with two input fields and a button add user. So whenever I write something here like Jane and Jane at jane.com and click add user, which is submitting the form, all the input values will be printed on the screen: name Jane, email Jane at jane.com. And if I decided to write something else and click add user, you see that it is printed again on the screen. So I want to test this very simple application by checking that these input fields exist on the screen. And also I want to check that whenever the user clicks on this button, the form is submitted with the correct data. So let's see how to achieve that in Jest and React testing library. If I go to my application, I want to create a folder called __tests __. It has to be in this specific format. And inside this folder, I want to create a file called userform.test.js. By the way, that folder has to be in the root directory of your application. And inside this user format test file, I want to import some functions, and I want to import the user form component in order to start testing it. So what kind of functions are we importing? We are importing a function called render. Render is just to test that, just to render the component on the screen, okay, on the document, fake document. And the screen is to interact with the components and interact with the document, which is the HTML document. And user, the user method is to simulate some user actions like user clicking on a button, writing on a keyboard, something like that. So let's start writing tests. I want to start by writing test, which is globally available by Jest. Pass it a string, which is it renders two input fields on the screen, and then pass it a callback. Okay, and inside this callback, I can write the logic for my test. So I want to, first of all, to render the user form component. Usually our tests follow these steps, which is, first of all, render the component, and then manipulate the document, which is the HTML document, and then do assertions. We're going to talk about assertions later, but for now, let's see how we can manipulate the HTML document. I want to, after rendering the component, I want to select all the input fields that are inside this component. So I want to const input fields equals to, in order to select, I want to use the screen dot. Here are a lot of query methods. I want to get all by role. Okay, this is a query method that can query our document based on role. But what is the role? Let's write text box. Okay, what is this role? The role refers to the ARIA role system, which is a system in web development that helps people with disabilities to understand our application and our websites. The ARIA role system has its own standards and it's not easy to understand. So I'm not going to go in detail about that, but for our purposes, in order to select any HTML element, I want to use the role. And if you click Control Space here, you can see that I have a lot of roles already defined. And if you are not sure about what kind of role you want to select, you can simply go to ChatGPT and ask what is the ARIA role associated with an input, and you get an answer, which is text box. Okay, text box. And since we selected all the roles that have the text box as an ARIA role, I expect to get back an array. So this is an array of HTML elements. So I want to say, in my assertion, I want to say I expect. Okay, I want to expect that input fields. Here we define some matcher, something called a matcher. The matchers are, I don't memorize the matchers from my head, so I can go to documentation of testing in Jest. And you see here the matchers. So I want to test that it has a length. I want to go length. You can see that this matcher to have length. So to have length. And I want to pass it a number, which is number 2, because I have only 2 input fields. So, and now let's test our test file. So I want to go to this terminal and write npm run test watch, which will run just in a watch mode. So any changes we make will automatically run our test again and again. You can see that I already have an error. So I think I misspelled length to capital L. And now it should work. You can see that the tests pass and we're good and happy. This feeling of seeing your test pass is the best feeling in the world. Anyway, let's test if we write 3 instead of 2. We can see that it will fail, I think. Come on. Yeah, it fails. So our test is working fine. Now let's test another thing, which is not only we have only 2 inputs on the screen. We want to test what happens if I wrote something inside these inputs and click on the submission button, which is add user. So I want to write another test, which is it. No, not it, sorry, test. It calls the onAdd user function with proper arguments when or upon form submission, and we'll pass a callback function as a second argument and start writing the test logic here. But I want to check that this function has the proper name. I want to go to the form component. No, not form component. I think in page.tsx. Yeah, you can see that user form has this on user add. So I want to check that this on user add is invoked or it's called when the form is submitted. So I want to copy paste. Yeah, on user add, not add user. Anyway, let's start by first rendering. Okay, I want to render the user form component. So render user form. After rendering the component, I want to start manipulate the document. So how can I mimic the fact that the user submits a form? So first of all, I want to select the input. Okay, select the input. So there are multiple ways to select an input. If we remember that we already did something similar, which is selecting all the input fields on the document, and then we can simply say that const name field equals to input fields, the first index. Okay, so that is the name input field, and then we can click on that by using the await, because we want to await for the user to click on the name field. Okay, since we defined await, we need to write here as async. Okay. But this way of selecting the input field is not optimal. Why is that? Because at some point in time, I might decide that my form changes its layout. Maybe the input field of the name comes second and the email comes first. Maybe I add password here. Maybe I change the entire structure of the component. So it doesn't make sense to lock the name input field as the first index. So I don't want to follow this approach in selecting the name input field. I want to select it based on something else, which is screen.getRoleBy or get by role. And of course, it's a text box. And here the difference is I want to pass options. You can see that options to filter what kind of elements I want to choose from the document. So I want to filter by name and write a regex, which is name I. Okay, what is this name I? It means that I want to select any input field. Okay, I want to select the input field that has the name associated with that input. So how it works? It works like this. We have a label and we have an input. Okay, so I want to select the input that has a label called name. But how does the HTML knows that this label belongs to this input and not to this input? Okay, here, the email. The way that the document differentiates between the two is by defining this HTML4. So by defining HTML4 equals name, and inside the input I define ID with name. So I create a bond between the input and the label. So in the test, when I select the area role text box with name called name, I actually select this input because it is associated with this label. Okay, and the fact that I chose name here with I, it means that I can select any input that has the label name. Okay, that has the label name. Maybe name, maybe namey, because it doesn't matter, at least it has name. And also I don't care about capitalization or something like that. And that's it. And we can test that if we decide to write something like namey and something that very weird, the test still runs and still passes because at least I can see that there is name. But if I decided to add something in here like nafme, okay, we should expect we should expect the test to fail. As you can see, it fails because there is no element on the screen with nafme. Okay, it has to be name. Okay, anyway, we selected the input field, so I don't need this. After selecting the input field, I want to click on that. After click on the input field, I want to await user.keyboard, because I want to mimic the fact that the user is writing something inside the input. So I want to write Jane. And I want to repeat the same process for the email field. Okay, here it's email. Instead of name, it's email. And click on the email field and write some email like jane.test.com. And what else? So after clicking on the input fields and writing something in that, I want to submit the form. In order to submit the form or mimic the fact that the user is submitting the form, I want to select the button. So I want to const button equals to user, no, not user, sorry, screen dot get by role. The area role of a button is simply button. And I want to simulate the user clicking on the button, which is await user dot click. Click on what? Click on the button. Okay, after clicking on the button, I want to do an assertion. Which is that the function is being called. What kind of function I expect to be called? The function is this onUserAdd. Okay, onUserAdd is a prop, okay, that I expect to call a function like submit handler, and I want to define this function. So const submit handler is simply a function. Okay, so I want to check that this function is being called whenever the user clicks on the button. So I want here to expect this function dot to have, no, I don't know the name of the matcher, so I want to go to the Jest documentations. You can see that to have been called, so I can copy paste this. And let's test. Okay, one test passes, which is the first one, and the second test fails. Let's see the error message that I got. The error message says, matcher error, received value must be a mock or a spy. So I don't want to go in details about the difference between a mock and a spy, but for our case, I want to define a mock. So what is a mock? A mock is simply a fake representation of a function. That's even in English, in the English language, a mock is something fake or a fake representation of something. So when we mock a function, we actually make a fake representation of that function. Why a fake representation of the function, not the real implementation of it? Because in testing, I cannot call the real implementation of the function and do some testing on it. For example, I want to test how many times this function is being called, how many arguments being passed to that function, what kind of arguments being passed, if it's being called or not. So all these data that I want to collect from the function, I cannot collect it from a real function. I want to mock the function, so I want to create a fake function. In order to create a fake function, I just simply write jest.fn, and that's how we create a mock. So I can call it a mock submitter. Okay, you can see the test is already passing. So everything is working fine. Okay, now let's test that this function that is being called with specific arguments. So let's go back to the documentations, and I already have this function in here, which is called to have been called with specific arguments. So I want to call it on this. Okay, I expect that the function is being called and is being called with these arguments. What kind of arguments? The arguments are name and email, but let's make sure inside the user form. So on user, I want to call this function with these arguments, okay? Name and email. So let's define name. Name is Jane because we wrote Jane in the input in the name input field, and the email is, what was that? Jane@ts.com. And now it's time for real testing. You can see it passes, and to prove my point, if I decided to write something else, oh yeah, the test fails, so I know for sure that my tests are working fine and all my functions are working as expected. So that is my brief introduction into the world of testing. You've learned how to test React components and React components with functions as props and user actions like clicking on a button, clicking on input field, writing something inside the input field, and finally submitting the form and actually checking if the form is submitted with the right arguments. And that's something very cool. I hope you liked this video, and if you did, please click on the like button below and subscribe to my channel to see more videos like this in the future, and also expect to see more advanced content on testing with Jest and React testing library in the future in this series. So until then, see you very soon.